Hey everyone, I'm just going to be going over the lesson for landscape photography just now, so that's what we're up to today. So here we go. So for landscape photography, this lesson we're going to go over 3 artists examples, Ansel Adams, Andreas Gursky, and Anthony Danielle. 2 of these artists are really famous. The other one is somebody I just found searching for landscape photographers online. So he's not as well known. He's not famous. I just found him on Flickr. So let's get into it. First, we're going to start with Ansel Adams. He's basically considered like the father of landscape photography. He's the first one who really turned landscape photography into an art, and he became really well known for his landscape photos. They're really beautiful, and they have a lot of richness and depth of like contrast. So let's take a look. While we're looking at these photos together, I want you to be thinking about how is landscape photography different from what we've done so far. So far we have covered portrait photography and still life photography. And you might think, well, I know what landscape photography is. I want you to think about, while you're watching, what makes a landscape photo and not a portrait or not a still life. I want you to think about the actual like physical, tangible things that make these types of photography different. So on this board here, I'm going to be writing down things that's landscape photography must have versus should not have. And we'll fill in these 2 columns together. So here's an Ansel Adams photo. He was a photographer mostly in the western United States, in Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and California. So these are photos from all over the western United States. Okay, I want you to be thinking, what things are you noticing that they have in common, like between the photos? Some things to keep in mind are, what of these list of composition rules is he implementing the most? What are common themes? So I want you to look and decide what's being incorporated the most. Balance, contrast, leading lines, repetition, pattern, or rhythm, or any others you might be thinking of. Now, Ansel Adams was primarily doing his photography between the 1940s and the 1970s. He worked on black and white film for the most part. He did do a little bit of color film photography, but I don't want you to just assume, oh, his main one is contrast just because he photographed in black and white. Contrast is sort of a natural part of black and white photography, but also not all black and white photography has contrast. If a photo has some haze in it, it's going to have lower contrast, so don't just assume that contrast is one of the ones I'm looking for, okay? All right, let's look at a couple more. And I think there's one last one. Okay, so what are some things we're noticing in his photography that might be different from portraiture or still life? We're going to flick through these one more time. Okay, think about the angle of view. How much of the world can you see in these images? How much is in focus? Where are the focal points? Okay. After looking through these images, I hope you were noticing that these photos have a really wide angle of view, okay? So it should have a wide angle of view, right? The amount of the world that you can see is quite large and expansive in these photos, right? Even in this photo, while the focal point is sort of on these rocks right here, what you see is this great big landscape, right? It's not a close-up shot of just the one rock, right? You can still see a really wide range of the land, okay? Another thing you might have noticed that's sort of in common with these is repetition, okay? Right? That photo of the rocks, there's like all those rocks. The photo of that forest where you see all the trees, okay? There's often repetition incorporated into it. Now, does that mean that you have to have repetition? Not necessarily, okay? But repetition is a common feature, how about, of landscape photography. So it's not required, but it's a common feature. Repetition. Okay, let's move on to another photographer. Now, before we start him, I want you to think about something. Lots of people consider landscape photography to only be photos of nature. So I'm going to write nature on the board, but I'm going to put a question mark next to it, and we're going to look at some examples and decide if it has to be nature. Okay, so nature question mark. Okay, so Anthony Danielle is our next photographer. He's the artist I found just on the internet. He has an account on Flickr. He posts lots of photos on Instagram and his other online and social media accounts. I thought he was a very good example of a particular type of landscape photography. And as soon as you see it, you'll right away figure out what type of photography he focuses on. Okay, I'm just going to flick through them and then we'll talk a little bit more. So I want you to observe them and take them in, and then I'll discuss them. Is there one more? No. Okay, so these 4 photos. So Anthony Danielle focuses on what's called cityscape landscape photography. So to answer the question, does it have to be nature? No, it does not have to be nature. It can be nature or city, okay? So there's a such thing as cityscape. It just means it's a landscape style photo of a city instead of nature. Okay, so I'll write in parentheses cityscape. Okay, so let's take a look at these and talk about them. So in general, if you're taking landscape photography, you would maybe say, oh, it has to be of nature and there's not people in the photo. In a cityscape photo, people are kind of inevitable, right? You can't avoid people entirely. But I want you to notice in these photos, what role do the people play in the landscape photos? Are the people the main focus? Are they the subject? Are they the focal point? So on here I'm going to write focal point question mark. And we're going to determine it. Focal point question mark. Okay. If you notice, almost all of these photos have people in them, but the people become part of the landscape. They're just a feature of that environment, okay? Right, just like with the cars. If you think of it in the terms of a nature photo, are the trees or the rocks the main subject of the photo? And the answer is generally no, they are just a part of the entire environment, right? They're just a feature involved in that environment, and it would be the same in a cityscape. Okay, the focal point, especially like in this one, for example, you have quite a few people and they are in focus. You can see them, but they're not the main point of the photo, right? The point of the photo is sort of the weather, the colors and textures of the buildings, and so on. Okay, so the focal point, it should be a wide, right? It's kind of related to that wide angle of view. The focal point is the scene, not a single object. Okay, the focal point is the entire scene. Okay, so in the should not have, it should not have a single focal point, right? Right, everything is in focus. Sorry, I'm just writing here for a second. So it should not have a single point or subject. So we have a wide angle of view. Focal point is the entire scene. So Therefore, everything should be in focus. Okay. All right, let's keep looking at some stuff. Well, actually, before we do, I want you to notice again from our options here, what do these have in common with Ansel Adams? If you notice, here's a question: do we have that repetition? Do we have patterns or leading lines? The answer is yes, right? Repetition still counts even in cityscapes, okay? Because you have repetition of buildings, of windows, of cars, of people. Okay, so repetition is definitely a part of landscape photography. Does the photo have to have repetition? Not necessarily, but it's almost inevitable that you'll have repetition. Okay, same thing here. We have these guys, right, in this photo, and you could say, oh, they're maybe the focal point. However, they kind of, I don't want to say they blend into the background, but they can't become a part of the scene, right? Because you don't really see their individual faces. It's not really about what they're doing. It's just some guys hanging out back of a shop, and they're clearly dressed in like restaurant attire, and you can tell that these are the backs of restaurants, right? So you can they're just part of the scene. Okay, our next guy is Andreas Gursky. I have him in here. He's very famous. He's been doing photography since the late 80s. He's still making photography now. He's very well known. So let's take a look at him. I've put him in here to sort of challenge some of your ideas of what a landscape can be, what's possible. So he does have some more traditional photography as far as landscape goes. However, something that you might be interested to know for this photo and others similar to it, there's this walking path along the side of this photo. Now, and this is a river in France, the Rhine River, and normally this walking path is a very busy path. It has people on it all day long. What's unusual about this photo is the fact that the walking path is empty. One of the things he did for this photo is he took the people out using technology to Photoshop them out to try and show the landscape as it is without people. But in real life, the people are a part of this landscape. You can't separate them. So he has some unusual takes on some of what he does. So here's some of the more interesting ones that are less traditional. Okay, this is a photo of, this is a landscape in Utah, okay? How is it non-traditional? I want you to think a moment. Are most landscapes photographed from a moving car? Are most landscapes, do they include the highway? Or sort of some worn down houses? No, they don't, right? So that in itself is unusual. The subject matter is a little bit unusual, right? Most serious artists wouldn't be taking a photo of a landscape just out through the car window while they're going 80 miles an hour, right? Because then it makes everything feel a little bit, think about balance, right? By having that movement, like so much movement, so much blur, it feels a little bit unstable, right? It's a little bit jarring. But it is interesting to look at. Especially if you say compare this to Ansel Adams' landscape photos of Utah and Colorado and all these western United States, right? You have similar landscape as far as like geography, right? Mountains and forests and whatnot. But this is completely different from Ansel Adams because of the houses and the highway and all of that sort of thing. Okay, next. Okay, this one is in Japan. Okay, and this is also different. This is a cityscape, not unlike Anthony Danielle. However, it's a completely different angle, right? A completely different point of view on the city. This is like sort of a bird's eye view of a city, whereas Anthony Danielle was shooting from street level. So there's lots of different ways to do a cityscape. Okay, now we're getting into even more challenges to your preconceptions. This is the interior of a dollar store or a 99-cent store. But if you notice, if you pay attention, Think about the rules that we have for what makes something a landscape photo. It needs to have a wide angle of view. Does this photo have that? Yes, it does. You can see almost the whole store. Does it have repetition? Yes, there's definitely a repetition. Every food item has like 50 of that food item, right? Is it nature or city? And it's in a city. And the focal point has to be the entire scene. Everything is in focus. Is it completing that objective? Yes, it definitely is. Okay? So, you might think the inside of a building is not a landscape. But landscape is sort of a description of the type or the style of the photo, right? We already established it doesn't have to be nature. Now, you are allowed to disagree that this counts as a landscape photo, but I would like to challenge you to broaden your perspective and consider that this could count. Here's another photo that might challenge your ideas of what is a landscape. This is the inside of where is this? This is in Beijing, China. This is inside the Olympic Circle building, the interior of that. Okay? So if you're saying, well, this isn't a landscape, consider what we said it has to have. It needs to have a wide angle of view. Yes, this does have a wide angle. We're seeing a very large view top to bottom, right? Maybe not necessarily wide from side to side, but that's because of the orientation of the photo. Does it have repetition? Yes, most definitely. The stairs, the ceiling, the walls have all repetition. It can be nature or city. This would be a city, right? And the focal point has to include everything. Everything needs to be in focus. Does it do that? Yes. Yes, it does. Okay, here are a few more. Now, a minute ago, when we were looking at Anthony Danielle, I talked about how people can be in your landscape photo, but they should not be the focus, right? Let's add that to our should not have. People as focal point, right? It's not about the person. It's the people become part of the environment. People as focal point should not be on your photo, right? They should not be the only thing that's in sharp focus and everything else is soft and fuzzy, right? People are part of the background if they are there. People become a feature of the environment. Okay, so in this photo, are the people part of the environment or are they a focal point all by themselves? I would say they're part of the environment, right? What is a factory without the workers? Right? The workers are part of the factory, right? The factory doesn't function without them. They're almost a piece of the machinery, right? Here's another one. We're getting that wide angle, that repetition. The whole scene is in focus, and the people are part of the environment. They are not the focal point. So, you might disagree with some of these photos and say, I just still don't think that's a landscape. But consider that this is possible, that landscape photography can include photos such as this. Okay, because here, I have one last photo. Compare this to this photo. Is this a portrait or a landscape? This is a portrait. How do we know? There is only one or two items as the focal point, as the subject matter. It's one girl in this particular instance. What about the background? Right, there's a single focal point and there's a single focal point and everything else is soft and blurry, which brings all the attention to her. Right? This is the exact opposite of a landscape, right? So, compare this one, which is definitely a portrait, to this one. Would you still say this is a portrait? I would not. I would consider this a landscape. The people become part of the environment. In this last photo, she's definitely not part of the environment. The environment surrounds her, but the photo is about her. Okay, so that is landscape photography. So our must-haves are wide angle of view. Repetition is not required, but encouraged, or is common. It's not required, it's just common. Okay, it can be the nature or city, so it can be a nature landscape or a cityscape. The focal point is the entire scene. The focal point, everything needs to be in focus. And people become a feature of the environment. It should not have a single point of focus, and people should not be the focal point. Okay, so now, what does this mean for you? Okay, we have a landscape project that we're going to do based on these rules. You are going to go out into the world and you're going to choose a style. You can emulate one of these photographers if you like. Okay, we're going to take a landscape, whether it's cityscape or landscape, and you're going to do, I believe it was 2 or 3 photos. Double check on the assignment, okay? Read the instructions on the assignment because I don't remember what I've put. But you're going to do 2 to 3 landscape photos. They do not need to be of the same scene. They can be, each of the photos can be of a different situation or environment, okay? And you're going to turn in your best ones, right? Remember that rule? Only about 10% of the photos that you take are going to be worth keeping. So if I need you to turn in 2 to 3 photos that are very good, you'll need to shoot 20 to 30 photos to get those 3 good ones, okay? So here we go. So 2 to 3 landscapes. They do not need to be of the same location. They can be different locations. And they need to be your best work, right? Like, think through it, do your best. Right? And we need to have good balance and contrast, leading lines, repetition, pattern, rhythm, right? You need to follow the composition rules that we've been talking about all semester. Make sure you have good lighting. Make sure you pay attention to focal point, all of those things that are on our list of our must-haves. I will be asking you in class to do a plan on a piece of paper to plan out a day and a time and a location of where you can go, and turn that in for part of your grade for this project. If you're online only, I encourage you to do this part, but it is not strictly required for you since I'm not there to help you work through your ideas. But I do encourage you to submit at least a comment or send me a message with your plan. I would really appreciate that so that I know that you're planning ahead. This project will not be due until right after Thanksgiving, like right as soon as we come back from Thanksgiving. So you're going to have 3 weeks to do this project. And this is almost entirely on your own. We're not going to be doing this in class at all because there's not a whole lot of landscape for us to photograph here at school. There's just not very many options, right? There's suburban, cityscape, and that's all we have available. So this is one of those things where you're just going to have to do this on your own. We will have other work that we'll be doing in class. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Please let me know if you have questions or comments, and I'd be happy to help you out. We can always meet on Zoom. I have office hours posted. Just message me if you want to make use of those. Okay, I will see you guys later. Bye.